Hey everyone, we're going to be chatting about Chaoszeronightmare. It's a new roguelike deck builder sci-fi horror gacha game that's in the works that recently wrapped up their limited playtest beta. Disclaimer, this is using the beta for the basis of these impressions and off of what I've played during that playtest. With that out of the way, I think the game, from what I've seen so far and have played, has a great deal of potential, but I think it's holding itself back by being a gacha game. Let's talk about why that is. If you want an apples to apples, it'd be like Slay the Spire combined with Darkest Dungeon, but that would only get you some of the percent of the way there. So to set the stage, I'll show you the potential that I see. I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about the gameplay through this example battle. So jumping straight in, we have this Slay the Spire-esque map where we can actually see the routing between encounters to actually end up at a final boss. You'll have the usual things such as random encounters, battles, elite battles, resting areas, shopkeeper areas, and then the final boss at the very end. So on the bottom we have our cards and our action points. On the top left, we have our team health bar and stress levels per character. The enemies have a toughness bar that will take more damage if you're using the right typing. They also have action counter. That kind of acts as like a check for miracle decks that are pretty much trying to play a game of solitaire.
There's also intent showing the enemy's next move, so you can plan accordingly.
So you're probably wondering what the hell that was. So what happened is Tressa's stress level maxed out, and that causes her to enter a mental breakdown state. During this mental breakdown state, her cards transform into mental breakdown cards. In this case, escapism cards. The card itself explains how to get rid of the mental breakdown status. So playing 5 of these will bring her back to normal. We have the final 2 breakdown cards, and we can free Tressa. So we heal back her stress, her allies get some stress healed back too. And this is where that bar that we talked about earlier comes into play. The easiest way to explain is that this is a resource that gets built whenever you perform actions. This is the way we can cast ego skills. Ego skills are essentially the ultimates per character. So Tressa's is going to be Wave of Darkness. Get this cool animation, and then we end up with 3 Shadow Daggers. And with that, that highlights most of the combat mechanics. But there's one very important thing that didn't get touched on in this footage. And that is, how do you actually gain more cards? So, card gain works is that you have something called epiphanies. Epiphanies are highlighted with the light bulb and the marked card having like that little gold star on the top left of it. Doing that will actually give you a new card for free that turn that you can then immediately cast afterward. The other thing that can happen during epiphanies is whenever you play that card, you trigger something called an effect, and that actually adds a modifier to that card. Sort of like how other games make you upgrade those cards, those happen naturally through epiphanies instead. You can also have equipment drop from encounters and combats that will apply certain effects and also be a stat stick. Now, let's fast forward to a run that is going south. You enter a state called Link Crash. It's pretty much a death's door mechanic. You get hit one more time, the party wipes. So next we're going to talk about 2 mechanics that overlap with each other, that happens after completing a run. So you're going to get thrown into the results screen, but you're also going to start saving data. What saving data means is that you're essentially taking a snapshot of the build and cards that you had for that character before the party wiped or you killed the final boss. So with that round ending, we end up with having Renoa, character in the middle, having a new mental affliction, which is Reckless Charge. Keep this in mind. So now our characters have entered a state of deep trauma for Renoa and Owen. You can still run characters in that deep trauma state, and you'll enter this sort of new rule set. It's essentially higher risk for higher reward. Returning back to save data, here's what Owen's currently looks like. This is from the round before. It is currently unusable because he is still in deep trauma from that run and the one before it. For Renoa, since she just now entered deep trauma, she needs to also undergo counseling. To do counseling, we go over to the Epi1 Center. We can select whether to delete their memories or give them counseling. By deleting memories, you will lose that save data, but they will come back a lot quicker. Counseling is something on a limited resource that will let you bring them back, and they will retain the save data they had and restore it back to a usable state. So now that I have laid the cards out on the table, I hope you can see why I think there's so much promise in this game.
The roguelike game mode is the glue to make the rest of the game function. From material farming, doing battle missions to up your account level. And I also forgot to mention there's also an aspect of the game where you're managing a city and also can do affinity stuff. Wow.
I think the gacha game design is holding back the game's potential. This is something that can be applied to every gacha game, but especially here, the game would just be so much more enticing to fans of the genre as a whole, rather than just players that are both fans of that genre but also in the gacha space, right? I'm thinking about the bigger picture of just having people that like these kind of games also play this one and give this one a shot as well. How it really starts chipping away at the game is the banner system. And I'm not going to be talking about the rates or how this is a 50-50, this is hard pities at 70, so on and so forth, the monetization implications that it has. Not that those aren't issues, but not the ones I'm going to cover. Saying that this banner system is bad should hopefully be as obvious as water being wet, so hopefully it gets reworked by the time they have their full launch. What I'm really thinking about is the cards that are locked behind the banners. Because each character comes with its own cards, you're essentially locked out of a wider breadth of options for deck building and creativity. You're effectively limiting the options that a player has to experiment. Moving on to the next point, and this overlaps with the characters behind a banner point, where you have something called Manifest Egos, where on a dupe you get extra card benefits. So for example, for Renoa, her first manifestation adds an extra line that creates one dirge bullet. A lot of her damage comes from discarding dirge bullets or an interaction with them. Instead, I feel like this is something that you could have just be merit-based permanent progression. So stuff like completing runs, hitting certain like leveling benchmarks, achievements of some kind, story-related tie-in. I feel like there's several avenues that you could experiment here, and it's just instead gatekept by the banner system.
Before moving to the next bullet point, I want to preface it with this. I think that their spin on save data is really interesting. As we talked about before, it snapshots your build at the time of run completion. That has a direct interaction with the character progression, which now let's move on to the next bullet point of how do you progress those characters individually?
They both end up falling into the material farming or gacha chores territory, where when you get to level 10, you need to get this material, then you can get it to 20, then you need the better version of that material, then when you get to level 30, then 40, then 50, then 60. This is just bloat to make the grind artificially longer for getting a character up. If I'm going to be playing the game anyways, why not just grant me the benefit of the more experienced an agent gets in running through the chaos, the more literal experience that they get. Why interact with content that you're not actively engaging in? Because it's a chore. Then you go into this thing where it's time-gated player usables. So why only 3 councils per day? We talked about it during the save data segment, but that's a limited resource that you can only use 3 of per day. And then, stamina in general as a mechanic for gating progression. I don't understand. Counseling could be a resource that happens automatically, so if, let's say, it's a buffer of 1 run, where I can't use that agent, or depending on the status of the trauma, it could take 1 to 3 runs. Right, depending on how deep the infliction is. It doesn't need to be a time-gated resource. So with that all out of the way, I just want the game loop. Why get in the way of the potential by slapping on these game design tropes that come from gacha games? The audience that they're working with is already a niche of roguelike deck builders. Now you're slapping on the tag of gacha onto it as well. That gives you an even more narrow audience. If this game manages to get itself in front of the main audience of roguelike deck builder enjoyers, they'll probably come to see that the game loop is great. I like the stress mechanics that are applied on top of the usual card battling system. I like the idea of epiphanies. That means it adds more replayability because epiphanies are random in terms of which upgrades you can get. There's a lot of replayability here. If this was a $25 Steam game with some marketing behind it, I'm sure it would be a day one purchase for a lot of those roguelike deck building players. As a gacha game, I don't know. I think chaoszeronightmare is unique enough, addicting enough with its game loop to stand on its own without the gacha-fication of it. And it would be able to make its mark on the roguelike deck building genre. Real quick, I'll rapid fire through some game improvement requests. To reiterate, adding a dictionary for all keywords, it'll be especially helpful for when I'm deciding upgrades from epiphany effects. Explore the stress mechanics further, have the mind break cards do something, because currently, characters taking null actions doesn't necessarily make sense for the condition that they might have. Even if it means like having them sporadically attack something at random, that's better than having them just do nothing and it'll be essentially stun locked. Explore more opportunities for save data to be recursive progression, so that chaining save data I spoke of, like how it can feed into itself. Unlocking character power through play, not pay, addressing dupes, shifting the power back into the base character, or making them attainable through play. Better localization. Now, I'll remind you of the disclaimer before of this is going over only the beta, I can't predict the future. And with that, those are my thoughts on chaoszeronightmare. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you have your own thoughts down below, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'll catch you later.